Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. Today's video is a special episode featuring an exclusive one-on-one interview with Goodyear's Director of Racing, Greg Stucker. Goodyear has received a lot of attention lately, starting with the wild race at Bristol, where tire falloff played a serious role in the race and was a reminder of the good old days for many drivers and fans. Many have said, more of that. Unfortunately, that case was a happy accident. Goodyear didn't know what caused it and hasn't publicly identified specifically what happened. Until now. I sat down with Stucker for an extended interview at Texas Motor Speedway, and we talked about a variety of topics, including what happened at Bristol and, more importantly, what Goodyear believes was responsible for that happy accident. Plus, we talked about the latest orders from NASCAR and the tire manufacturer's new, more aggressive approach in trying to address short track issues, and that means any and all options are on the table, including adopting something similar to what is used in F1 and IndyCar. So I guess let's start with that. Let's go back to Bristol if we could.
Okay, sure.
And is there any news on, I know y'all didn't pee in the compound as Denny suggested.
Well, I think that's his way of saying something was different. I think we all recognize something was different.
Correct.
The question is, what was different enough to make the result that we saw?
Right.
Right? So obviously, anytime something like that happens, we did run that same setup in the fall of last year. Right? And our intent was take exactly the same tire back because it performed well.
Right.
And so that was our intent. So with the result as it was, the first thing we do is say, okay, did we actually get what we expect? Was there anything different?
Right.
So that night, our guys started talking to the plant, talking to our material specialists. Say, okay, look, go back and look at all the materials that went into that batch of tires. Was there anything different?
And there's a wide variety of combinations, right?
There's a huge number of oils and resins. Right. You got fabric. I mean, you got different compounds throughout the tire, right?
Okay.
All that stuff is released to certain specs.
Sure.
We have all that, right?
Okay.
Just like any manufactured product is.
Right.
So we go back and pour through that information and just make sure everything was exactly as we expected.
Right.
And it was.
Okay.
Okay. So that's check number one.
Okay.
Okay. Make sure we have exactly what we plan to have.
Sure.
And we did that, right? The rest is, okay, what did change? We talked to the racetrack. We talked to SMI, right? I think you got to recognize one of the differences, and nobody really thought about it, but for the last 3 years, that race in the spring has been on the dirt. So that racetrack has sat with dirt on it through the winter in preparation for our race in the spring. It didn't this year, right?
Okay.
It sat exposed, right? We were the first, and we were the first ones on the track this season, right? Now, when we race in the fall, like last year in 2023, we raced on the dirt. That got cleared off. The racetrack gets cleaned. There's other races. There's a truck race. There's an Xfinity race. There's practice for each of those.
Right.
There's practice for Cup. And then the Cup race happens, right? This year, there was nothing ahead of time.
Right.
Then there was only the trucks,
right?
And it's a shorter race than the Xfinity race, and then the Cup race. It was also cooler than it was minimally, but it was cooler.
How much temperature?
Probably 5 degrees is all. Okay. So is that a factor? Again, it's minimal. Okay. But I think we've come to the conclusion that it was just a number of different factors. It wasn't any one particular item that created the wear that we saw there. It's just that it's that marginal. It's that marginal on a concrete racetrack. The other item that is different was the track was treated with a different material than it was previous years. Resin instead of PJ1. So what is the impact of that PJ1 once cars run through it? Do they carry it up the racetrack as they start to move up the racetrack?
Right.
Does that help? Does that help the rest of the racetrack rubber in?
Okay.
We think the answer to that is probably yes.
Okay.
Right? So we think there's just a number of different factors that kind of created this, I'm not going to call it a perfect storm, but this perfect situation.
Sure.
Right? That created what we saw.
So let me make sure we kind of try to pinpoint those factors, or at least identify them roughly. So the dirt being on there
right
previously, and that wasn't the type of, you had no racing on the track at all. So that was one.
Was a green racetrack.
A green racetrack. 5 degrees temperature difference.
Yep.
And then the resin versus, because it was PJ1 or resin?
It was resin this year, right? It was
Previously.
PJ1 in previous years.
Okay.
Right.
So, and y'all didn't want to do the PJ1 because under wet conditions it made it super slick.
It makes it slick.
Okay.
Right.
Whereas the resin in wet conditions would be okay.
Would be okay. Right.
Okay.
So that was more of a call between NASCAR and with our input, but we all agreed that can create a situation with the PJ1.
Okay.
Yes.
So those things. So do you do like an autopsy on it to try to just?
Well, we're gonna go back and test.
Okay.
So we're gonna go back and test in July.
July.
Now the input from everyone, fans included, is don't change anything.
Yeah,
it was okay.
Yeah. Of course.
Okay. Well, in our mind, wearing tires as quickly as we did or as early as we did, that's
Sure.
a bit much, right? And I said that right from the start.
Right.
And everybody's input was, okay, we get that, but boy, just don't change it drastically. It was
Right.
it was okay. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go back there and we'll put that same tire on the ground. It's going to be different conditions, right? It's going to be July in
Hot.
Bristol. It's going to be hot. And so if that racetrack takes rubber as we expect it to, okay, well then we kind of have our answer going, right?
So
if
it
doesn't,
won't wear as much is what you're expecting.
correct, right.
Okay. Because I also know in talking to Mike Ford was, I asked him the question, because I can't remember who was saying it, Probst or someone, about how they had initially had 11 sets and pulled it back to 10, because that's what they had last year, but they had, numerous teams had extra sets of tires, so they pulled it back. So it actually did turn out to be kind of the perfect storm with that combination of factors.
Right.
If they had the 11 sets initially, it really wouldn't have been an issue. People wouldn't have been scrambling, right?
Well, yeah, I don't think it would change things drastically. I mean, the only difference was we mounted that set during the race,
right.
Whereas before it would have been mounted ahead of time, right?
Right.
Okay, so, but that's not going to change the amount of wear
Right.
that we saw,
Of course,
when people could change. I think it just made it more tolerable to get to the end of the race that way,
Okay, so we'll go to July and test
Right.
at Bristol.
Right.
So this is what I was talking to Mike, and I was talking to the drivers. So I asked Joey, and what I was saying is there the possibility of, this is just a far-fetched idea, but it's something I came up with, was on Monday, based on what Denny Hamlin said, okay, get Dale Jr. or someone out on Mondays, and then Tuesdays and Wednesdays, for the foreseeable future, we have drivers from teams testing the cars, and we're going to fix this, and we're going to test until we fix it, right? Not do tests in 6 months.
What do you fix?
Well, again, and that was what I was going to come back to. Is I don't even know what we're fixing or what the testing is. I'm more concerned about the scheduling of it.
Right.
And so I presented it to Bob. I said, so what would you think of this? And he said, well, the tire compounds, how long it takes them to make everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really kind of what I want to get a sense is from you guys. Is it possible, just play along with me,
Okay.
We do the junior or Harvick or someone who's just a Monday tester and a Tuesday and Wednesday, doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to expedite the testing process.
You're just going out there and test every week.
Trying to get it done, knock it out. So people are talking about taking away tracks from short tracks. So just to solve this problem and get resolution so it's not dragging on and people are getting more angry and bitter about it, because it is the short track. So is there a scenario where the process could be expedited, where we're not testing in July, we're testing next month? You know what I'm saying? Because that to me is that's the delay, and then you go and test and then it doesn't work, and then we have to wait another 3 months. And so it just seems like we're just dragging it out. Again, total layman's perspective. So why couldn't it be expedited?
Well, again, I think yeah, you could do that. Okay, there's testing rules in place that don't allow that to happen right now.
That's
right?
what Mike was telling me.
Right, and so there used to be a whole lot more testing that went on all during the week.
Right.
Right. and NASCAR implemented rules to restrict that because the major teams got the advantage and the lower teams did not because they couldn't afford it, right?
Right.
It's just the differentiation
Right.
in budgets, right? So there's a rules issue you have to overcome, and the second part of that is, whose car, right? Who preps the car, right? Is that going to be a Hendrick car? Is that going to be a Stewart-Haas car? So whoever does that, they've got the obligation of doing that in addition to racing every
Right.
week. All right, is that going to be an advantage or going to be a disadvantage? I think you're better off having a normal cadence like we do,
Fair.
right? And get different teams involved at different times. At our tests, we have a Toyota, we have a Chevy, we have a Ford,
Right.
and that gets rotated amongst the teams.
Right.
With Toyota, a lot of times it's going to be Gibbs because they're
Gibbs,
the main
yeah,
one, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, but it might be Penske or it might be Front Row or it'll bounce around, right?
Right.
Depending on the other cars. And by doing that, you get a lot of different feedback. So
Sure.
everybody gets in the loop. Everybody has an opportunity to be part of it, to be part of the solution, to provide feedback.
Right.
And so I think the important thing is, you learn at races. So we learned something at
course, yeah.
Bristol,
Yeah.
right? We learned something at Richmond when we put the wets on,
Sure.
right, during the damn conditions. So I think the important thing is now we sit down with NASCAR every week. We have a Tuesday call with NASCAR. And we talk about the previous week. Okay, and then so we formulate a plan on what we're doing next, right? And I think it's good to be methodical about that,
Sure.
and just keep addressing the problem, right? And I use the word problem. A lot of people think it's a big problem.
Of course.
I happen to think it's not a huge problem
Right.
because really, if you look at the racing throughout the pack, watch Richmond, and there's a lot of good racing going on all over the racetrack, right? Somebody may run away with it,
Right.
okay, but that's going to happen sometime,
Right.
right? I think what everybody likes about Bristol is that the drivers really had to manage the tires. The crew chiefs had to manage their strategy, and they had to manage their drivers, right?
Right, of course.
So I think that was what everybody enjoyed. You probably read Chris Gabehart's comments.
Sure.
Now they won the race and all that, but I think still he was genuine about, I really had fun because I really impacted things, and Denny really impacted
Yeah.
things, right? And I think ultimately that's where people want to get to, right? And at some tracks it's going to be easier to get to than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just what we're trying to figure out. We've talked with NASCAR yesterday for about an hour, again this morning for about an hour, talking about different things to try, different things to look at. And we sat with the drivers yesterday, and
Mm-hmm.
Michael McDowell said, "Well, gee, I was hoping you guys had the silver bullet. You could just, it's just this one thing."
Of course.
It's not.
No.
I think NASCAR has tried some things with the car itself, aero-wise,
Right.
And I think they made an improvement. I think the car is better since our Phoenix test at the end of last year, as we race it now in the short tracks.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some other things they're looking at to do, right?
Right.
So it's, even though a lot of people say it's all about the tires, it's really not. It's really about the total package. And so what we try to do is figure out, okay, how can tires play a role in that, right? And everybody likes to talk about tire fall off, right?
Right.
How much slower is at the end of a run?
Right.
Well, if everybody's on the same strategy, it doesn't really. It's going to fall off the same for everybody, right?
Right.
And so I think that's what people liked about Bristol, because
Of course, yeah.
you could make it worse than somebody else, right? You couldn't just run the car hard right from the start.
Like Ty Gibbs.
Like Ty Gibbs did.
I mean,
right?
he was blowing
He
past
did.
everybody and
then
falling back at the
up,
end.
right? Yeah. So I think what we're trying to figure out is what's the right balance for that. Where do we want to get to so that it's not going to happen at every racetrack. I can
Right.
tell you that.
Sure.
Right. We're going to go to North Wilkesboro for the All-Star race, and it's a repave. Repaves typically have a lot of grip, and there's not going to be a lot of fall off, right? So you just have to manage through it for different racetracks. Certain racetracks are going to be better than others, and I mean, tire wear, tire fall off is greatly influenced by the track surface.
Right.
No question.
Sure.
It's greatly influenced by ambient conditions.
Of course.
If you run at night versus running in the daytime, I guarantee you will not have as much tire fall off as you do
Because
in
the
the
tires
daytime.
don't get hot enough.
Because everything gets
And-
hot. The racetrack gets hot. If you're running on asphalt, the oils in the asphalt come to the surface.
Okay.
Everything is different.
So, first thing, wet tires.
Mhm.
Okay, that obviously has been a big success. So kudos to you and NASCAR for doing that, because that
Mhm.
obviously has changed the whole game when it comes to wet, damp conditions, whatever
Right.
we want to call them.
Yep.
So you obviously have heard people say, "Hey, we've got a wet tire that falls off.
Mhm.
Why can't we use something similar to that, even with the groove?" I mean,
And
why is that something that's been discussed with NASCAR?
and we're trying to learn from that. What do we know about the wet tire that we can apply to track conditions, right? It's not as simple as saying, okay, we're just going to run the wet
Right,
tire everywhere,
right,
right?
sure.
Because it's just not going to last. The wet tire is formulated to operate in those conditions,
Okay.
in cool, damp conditions. If you tried running that tire, you see it. You saw it at Richmond when those tires came off. Depending on the balance of the race
Right.
car, they're pretty chewed up, right?
Right.
You would see the same thing with a slick. Now, again, what can we learn from the formulation of that wet compound versus our dry compounds?
Right.
Maybe there's something we can apply to create more fall off, to create more temperature, so there is more fall off or there's more wear. So those are sort of things that you try to do.
Okay, and then the one thing that I presented at COTA a few weeks back to Denny and Brad, and they all liked the idea in 2017, the All-Star race, where there were multiple compounds to choose from, soft, hard, medium. To me, that seems like that could be an option, because then people could go, all right, I have this many sets of soft, I'm gonna blast it, I'm gonna get out front, and then in the back end, I'm not gonna have those, and I'm not gonna have as much traction.
Right.
So, am I crazy? Is that something that could be
No,
considered?
we tried an option tire several years back for the All-Star.
Right, 2017.
Right. And what happened was, for us, I think it was successful. The split that we wanted to create
Right.
in agreement was about 3/10. Okay, we wanted the option tire to be about 3/10 faster than the prime, and it was
Mhm.
in the daytime.
Right.
Then we got to nighttime and race,
And the race, yeah.
and that gap narrowed.
Right.
So then it didn't become as big of an advantage, right?
Right.
But we have discussed that, right? So it is an option. It is something that's been placed on the table. Again, it's how much do we want to create? How are we going to manage it? Is that something you want to put into the hands of the teams?
Right.
The NASCAR world is different than Formula One
Sure.
world, the rules and everything
Of
else.
course.
So that'd be something they would have to, kind of have to weigh in and see how much you really want to do that,
Right.
right? But no, that's not beyond the realm of possibility. I don't think.
All right, and then the last thing.
Certainly, like you said, as an experiment, right?
Right,
We're
try it.
trying different things.
Of course.
Let's try it at an event and see what happens, and then you kind of you learn from there.
Well, I mean, Joey said, on Sirius XM this week, let's take a big swing. Brian Blaney said we got to make drastic changes. I asked
Yeah.
him yesterday. So it feels like this is that moment, that opportunity to let's take a big swing at this,
Yeah.
and let's try to do something. Let's try to replicate
Sure.
Bristol. But I mean, it feels like to me, and this is what Brian said yesterday. It's like we just got to keep throwing darts and hope one of them sticks,
Yeah.
right? Because.
Well, I prefer where
You're
we're
more
shooting with a laser, or
No.
instead of just throwing it, we got
Right.
a little bit more.
But I mean, it feels like that from the outside's perspective, because we don't know all the details of what's going on.
Yeah.
We just hear from NASCAR. We're doing a test here, and you hear the drivers, and you don't always get a sense. Because I heard Dale Jr. I think it was last year talking about before the Phoenix test is we got to get drivers out there who know what they're looking for. They're not looking to find an advantage in their car. They're looking to find out how the fall off is and how the car feels,
Right.
and the change and all that stuff. And so
Right.
it feels like I said, well, good, it's very nuanced. There can be all these things that people could have different motivations when they're going into these tests,
Right.
and not necessarily see the things that are happening, right? So
So we tested last year at Loudon in preparation for that race, right? Came up with a package, and we heard that message loud and clear. Take a big swing, right? Don't be scared to overshoot it, right? So we're taking that approach now. So we took a really big swing at Loudon, and we raced that. And everybody thought that was a big game, right? So that same compound is what we raced at Phoenix in the spring, right? Excuse me, in the fall, and again this spring, right? And so I think, you know, what was a big change, now everybody kind of says, okay, well that's not enough. So what's the next big change, right? You know, so I think you know we are trying to change our philosophy and be more aggressive.
Good.
There was always the understanding, I think, whether it came from us or from NASCAR or just in general, that, you know, we'll provide you guys with as much grip as we can, but we also want to make sure that we can run a full fuel stop.
Right.
I think that's kind of out the window.
Okay.
I think running a full fuel stop is not necessarily mandatory anymore.
Okay.
And that comes from TV, that comes from NASCAR, that comes from the drivers. It's back to let us manage it. Right.
All right.
And so that if you have a tire that can't run a full fuel stop, that means tire management is going to be important. Somebody might be able to stretch it, but a lot of guys probably don't want to stretch it.
Right.
They know there's going to be a caution for something, so they're going to push it harder, right?
All right. Then the last one that I have, you came out and did the PR and it was on the broadcast in the middle, and you hear all the time that Goodyear is afraid of the perception of their tires are being put on cars and they're having blowout. And I know y'all had the Indy situation. I was at Texas here a couple years ago when we were having the tires blow out in turn 4. So I understand the perception of the general public and buying tires, but I'm just curious, and again, I don't know, but it feels like that's kind of a leap that, oh, those tires are blown up. Because I would think, and maybe it's because I do know more than maybe the average fan, that they push the limits on these tires. They are testing them to their very edge, just like they are in a race car.
Right.
So when they don't inflate them to the proper recommendation that you guys give them, then things can happen and problems can ensue, but that's not necessarily reflective of how the general populace would behave with the tires. So when Goodyear is concerned about the PR side of it, that's where I'm like, how does it really translate? Because as a fan, I'm going to buy Goodyear because I trust Goodyear as a tire, not because their racing tires are blowing up because these guys are really pushing it. So is that really a concern for you guys?
I think you got a couple different things, right? So let's go back to Texas here, right? 2 years ago, right? Fairly early in the development of the next gen car, guys were really pushing the envelope, trying to get the rear of the car down out of the air, and they were just being extremely aggressive on air pressures. We knew that's what it was. Okay, and it was consistent. So Mike and I went to the media center and we told everybody that's exactly what it was. Okay, so we know that. That's a different situation, and I don't mind going and telling people, here's what it is. We know what's happening. We try to give the guys as much information to make good decisions, right, in their setups, but it's a risk versus reward. If they choose to go beyond, you know, that's on them, right? And as long as they own it, I don't care. That's fine, right? Okay. And so that's one situation. If you go to Bristol a few weeks back, I think the thing that we didn't like was it was unexpected. It's not what we expected to happen. Based on the race that we had in the fall of 2023, we expected the same result, and that didn't happen. So I think that is what we were concerned about, the uncertainty of what guys could expect. So we don't want to deliver that. If we went into that race and said, you know, you're plan on 75 laps at the outside, that's all you're going to get, you got to plan accordingly, and we knew that, and then it's a different situation, right? But I think it was the unexpected. So we like to think we know what we're doing. We want people to think that we know what we're doing. So we don't like races like that because it's a surprise. So that's the thing that we try to avoid, right? And if it's if it's something that happens on the racetrack because a team makes a decision that's that's against what we recommend, okay, as long as they own it, that's okay. That's what racers do, right? They push the envelope on every part of the race car, so that's okay.
But the former happens way more often than the latter.
For sure.
You guys don't get caught unaware of stuff happening like what happened at Bristol.
Not very often.
Right. So I can understand you saying, hey, so I guess back to the original question is, you're not too terribly concerned of the general public going, oh my God, I'm not going to buy Goodyear tires because the tires are failing in the race because...
Not if that happens.
Yeah, okay.
Not very often.
Okay.
If that would happen a lot,
right,
yes, then I'm concerned about it, right? Because we race for brand image.
Of course.
Right? And we want people to have confidence in the Goodyear product.
Of course.
Because of what we're able to deliver out here versus other things we do, right?
Right.
But you don't come out here and have bad days every week and expect there not to be some sort of repercussion.